it's worth fighting for, and I don't think we can get out. And it's just the biggest damn mess
It is. It's an awful mess.
And we just got to think about, I look at this sergeant of mine this morning, got 6 little old kids over there.
Thank you for joining me again for our LBJ taped conversation series. The year 1964 seemed one of anguish for President Lyndon Johnson, judging from his taped phone conversations, such as this one, despite his spectacular election victory in November of that year. Certainly, every year of the Vietnam War was one of unique anguish for Johnson, but the particular anguish of 1964 was that of a looming decision regarding an escalating war. It was the year that Johnson had to decide whether to go forward and prosecute the war at complete risk to his domestic agenda, or pull back and be labeled weak against communism and dishonorable of American commitments. This particular conversation of anguish is from May 27, 1964, Johnson talking to his National Security Advisor, McGeorge. You may remember another same-day, May 27, anguish conversation Johnson had in talking with confidant Senator Richard Russell for 27 minutes. In my video, Our Position is Deteriorating. Unlike other YouTubers, I never pester you to subscribe or like, although I certainly want you to do so. At my advanced age, I don't prefer the term YouTuber, but I use it here due to a particular experience I had in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, filming this video, Escape from Cambodia, a video about legendary Air America pilot Neil Hansen, who escaped Cambodia the day after the Americans had evacuated and was the last known civilian flight out of Cambodia after the Khmer Rouge had taken over, when the airspace was already closed. It is a poignant and touching video. I was filming down on the Tonle Sap River, and a curious group of Cambodian lads was watching me, chattering away, so I moved further from them down closer to the river. They followed me. I smiled and gestured to what I thought was the young pack leader to please be quiet. He quickly told his mates in Cambodian to shut up. They all watched quietly and intently as I filmed, and when I finished, I smiled at them and said, "Som Algun." The little pack leader smiled back and replied in perfect English, "Are you a YouTuber?" I said, "I guess so." Before we listen to this anguished conversation between Johnson and Bundy, so many of you have commented on Robert McNamara's arrogance, really self-righteousness, and the folly of the U.S. following France into Indochina. McNamara reminds me of an instance of an old preacher down here in Appalachian, Kentucky, who many years ago lost his umbrella and was convinced a parishioner stole it. He told himself that the next Sunday he was going to preach on the 10 Commandments and really lay it on hard when he got to "Thou shalt not steal." The next Sunday he was preaching away, and when he got to the commandment immediately preceding "Thou shalt not steal," "Thou shalt not commit adultery," he remembered where he left his umbrella. Now, most of you probably know that an argument France used to get U.S. to support and bankroll its first Indochina war effort against the communist Viet Minh was that the war was costing France so much France might not be able to honor its NATO commitment. So, France pulled the NATO support card on the U.S. The U.S. worldview then was that Moscow was the one puppet master controlling all communist activities around the world, and this belief went way back. An early American scholar, West Virginia history professor Thomas E. Enos, wrote that the 1930 Vietnamese uprising against the French was controlled from Moscow, and the result of the machinations of Soviet agent Michael Borodin, who in fact had left Asia in 1927. President Truman's Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, was probably the leading proponent of a Moscow-centric communist threat, saying that Ho Chi Minh's movement was to establish a communist-dominated, Moscow-oriented state in Indochina. And to be fair, this was happening in East Europe. But our intellectuals were unable to differentiate Southeast Asia from Europe. Even the respected American foreign affairs analyst Sulzberger echoed Acheson's concern in the New York Times, writing that the disciplined machinery of international communism directed by Moscow is carrying out perhaps the most brilliant example of global political warfare so far known by draining the potential strength of France in the Indochina Civil War and thus simultaneously weakening the Western powers' position in Europe and Asia. That same day, the Times reported that highly competent military authorities in Tokyo believed the French might be able to hold off a concerted communist threat in Indochina if properly equipped. Yet, official American thinking about Indochina was less than unanimous. From Bangkok, the new head of the State Department Far East Division, W. Walton Butterworth, sent a blunt warning that economic and military aid to France for their war effort did not constitute the missing components in solving the problems posed by Asia. He said that the impression many in Washington held that aid to Indochina would be as effective and successful as had been American aid to Greece was, he said, a dangerous delusion. Additionally, the U.S. Army Plans and Operations Division in February 1950 wrote that to condition a course of action on the security interest of this place is false and narrow, because it was not clear that the U.S. had a vital security interest in this immediate area. The division contended that while the U.S. had a strategic interest in Southeast Asia as a whole, this interest was basically limited in terms of required action to guaranteeing Japan's access to the food supplies of the area. But the French held another ace in their hand beyond the NATO argument. In February 1950, for example, the French told American officials in Paris that without a long-term program of American military assistance, they might find it necessary to cut their losses and withdraw from Indochina. So what, you might say? Good. Let's put an end to colonialism. But in fact, by the time the Korean War had rolled around, with China already lost to communism, many U.S. leaders viewed France's effort against the Viet Minh as a proxy effort to contain world communism. We Americans seem to never learn the lessons of war, and that extends to the Korean conflict. We learned from that war that air power was very limited and could not alone defeat the enemy. I cite, academically, a July 1968 Department of Defense confidential paper which evaluated how the U.S. had achieved its war objectives to date in the Vietnam War, and it concluded, quote, "The U.S. bombing in North Vietnam and Laos has no observable effect upon enemy force or activity levels in South Vietnam. Since 1965, the U.S. attack sorties against North Vietnam and Laos have increased fourfold. Over the same period, the main enemy force has increased its strength levels by 75%, its attacks fivefold, and its overall activity ninefold." Secondly, we learned in the Korean War that strategic defense works. It is a mission for which the U.S. Army is well equipped. After years of seesaw battles with the Chinese, General Ridgway established a defense across the Korean peninsula, which at times was breached but never broken. I cannot emphasize this enough. This defense ended the Korean War, and it should have been applied to the North Vietnamese invasion route in Laos. But our State Department diplomats vetoed the idea. And please, let's give ourselves a break that Kennedy would have avoided war. Study what he and his advisors thought about Vietnam, the same advisors Johnson adopted. They considered France's earlier military experience in Vietnam irrelevant. France had sought territorial conquest. The U.S. sought to rescue a beleaguered nation. France had embodied a bygone power scheming to recapture yesterday's glory. America embodied a superpower with everything such status entailed. France committed forces to Vietnam, and once that process started, saw no end to it. America would do things differently and avoid France's fate. In my video on Vietnam War correspondence, you will hear Martin Stewart Fox, shown here at the Ia Drang, tell the story about having a cold brew with a U.S. Marine officer in Da Nang in 1965 and asking the Marine if they had studied the French experience in Vietnam. The Marine replied, "They lost. Why would we study them?" French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman told reporters in May 1950 he was amazed that the U.S. insisted upon discussing future Vietnamese independence from France when Vietnamese independence from communism was at stake. Ultimately, Washington concluded that a communist Viet Minh-dominated Vietnam was unacceptable, and if a Viet Minh victory was unacceptable, then a French defeat had to be forestalled, no matter what the price. Every time a hint from Paris that the French were faltering in their will to stay in Vietnam usually produced in America a political concession, additional aid, sometimes both. In time, avoiding French defeat incredibly became more important to the U.S. than to France. One State Department Far East expert, Charlton Ogburn, complained bitterly that the U.S. had been needlessly gagged and hogtied by its anxiety to avoid placing undue pressure on the French government. It was the beginning, he wrote, of a very bad mess. And now, the conversation.
Yes.
Mr. Bundy calling him on 90.
Just a moment.
Thank you.
Hello? Things that can't wait to our meeting this afternoon. One, in order to get the Canadians fully on board with as much of this message to Hanoi as we can get, we think it very important for someone to speak personally with Pearson. And I've tentatively nominated myself because I don't see anybody else. Would you object to my going up there tomorrow morning to give him the picture where we're going to be briefing his man and saying, giving whatever you would authorize me to say this afternoon? Or would you rather have the department do it or Butterworth do it, or would you want to do it by phone? The difficulty with the phone is it's not entirely secure. What their man is willing to carry in terms of messages to Hanoi may have a great deal to do with how we can get this thing turned off peacefully. And that Mike should know that he was doing it for you and not just for a lot of other people.
I think you can do it Friday. I think
Right.
maybe tomorrow you ought to be here.
Ought to be here. All right, I could do it that way. I could do it that way. Second question, Stevenson. You're going to be going up to New York.
I talked to him this morning, and he wanted to come down and see me, and he's going to call me back. And we finally kind of agreed we'd try to get together tomorrow night.
I would have thought that was the best way to do it, and I think we ought to plan that basis.
I'll tell you, the more I just stayed awake last night thinking about this thing, the more I think of it, I don't know what in the hell. It looks like me we're getting into another Korea. It just worries the hell out of me. I don't see what we can ever hope to get out of there with once we're committed. I believe the Chinese communists coming into it. I don't think that we can fight them 10,000 miles away from home and ever get anywhere in that area. I don't think it's worth fighting for, and I don't think we can get out. And it's just the biggest damn mess I ever saw.
It's an awful mess.
And we just got to think about, I looked at this sergeant of mine this morning, got 6 little old kids over there, and he was getting out my things and bringing me in my night reading and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought about ordering
Ordered
those
him
kids
out
in there, and what in the hell am I ordering him out there for?
One thing that
what the
has
hell's
occurred to
Vietnam
me-
worth to me? What is Laos worth to me? What is it worth to this country?
No, we have to
Now,
get
we
into
got
a
a treaty,
position to
but
explain
sure,
this.
we got a treaty, but hell, everybody else got a treaty out there, and they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, of course, if you start running the communists, they may just chase you right into your own kitchen.
Yeah, that's the trouble. And that is what the rest of that half of the world is going to think if this thing comes apart on us. That's the dilemma. That's exactly the dilemma.
But everybody I talk to that's got any sense now, they just says, oh, my God, please give us thought. Of course, I was reading Mansfield's stuff this morning, and it's just milk toast as it can be. He got no spine at all.
Yeah.
But this is a terrible thing we're getting ready to do.
Mr. President, I just think it's the only big decision in one sense this one is one we either reach up and get it or we let it go by, and I'm not telling you today what I'd do in your position. I just think the most we have to do is to pray with it for another while.
Anybody else that we got that we can advise with that might have any judgment on this question? That might be fresh, might have some new approach. Would Bradley be any good? Would Clay be any good?
No, Bradley'd be no good. I do not think Clay would add. I think you're constantly searching, if I understand you correctly, for some means of stiffening this thing that does not have this escalating aspect to it. And I've been up and down this with Bob McNamara, and I've been up and down it again with Mike Forrestal. I think there are some marginal things that we can do. And I think the notion of, also, Mr. President, you can do what I think Kennedy did at least once, which is to make the threat without having made your own internal decision that you'd actually carry it through. Now, I think the risk in that is that we have at least seemed to do it once or twice before. And there's another dilemma in here, which is how the difficulty your own people have I'm not talking about Dean Rusk or Bob McNamara or me, but people who are at second remove, who just find it very hard to be firm if they're not absolutely clear what your decision is, and yet you must safeguard that decision and keep your...
What does Bill think we ought to do?
He's in favor of touching things up, but you ought to talk to him about it. I've got an extremely good memorandum from Forrestal that I'm just getting ready for you that shows what he thinks about it. And
what does he think?
He thinks we ought to be ready to move a little bit, and mainly Vietnamese. On the other hand, readiness to do more. He believes really that that's the best way of galvanizing the South, that if they feel that we are prepared to take a little action against the center of this infection, that's the best way of moving.
What action do we take, though?
I think that we really need to do you some target folder work, Mr. President, that shows precisely what we do and don't mean here. And the main object is to kill as few people as possible, while creating an environment in which the incentive to react is as low as possible. But I can't say to you this is a small matter. There's one other thing that I've thought about, that I've only just thought about overnight, and it's on this same matter of saying to a guy, you go to Korea or you go to Vietnam and you fight in the rice paddies. I would love to know what would happen if we were to say in this same speech, and from now on, nobody goes to this task who doesn't volunteer. I think if we could, we might turn around the atmosphere of our own people out there if it were a volunteers enterprise. I suspect the Joint Chiefs won't agree to that, but I'd like to know what happened. If we really dramatize this as Americans against terror, and Americans keeping their commitment, and Americans who have only peace as their object, and only Americans who want to go have to go, you might change the temper of it some.
Well, you wouldn't have a corporal's guard, would you?
I just don't know. If that's true, then I'm not sure we're the country to do this job.
I don't think it's just Morris and Russell and
I know
Greening.
I think it's 90% of the people who don't want any part of it.
Did you see the poll this morning? 65% of them don't know anything about it. And of those that do, the majority think we're mishandling it, but they don't know what to do. That's Gallup.
Yeah.
And it's damned easy to get in war, but it's going to be awfully hard to ever extricate yourself if you get in.
I'm very sensitive to the fact that people who are having trouble with an intransigent problem find it very easy to come and say to the President of the United States, go and be tough.
What does Lippman think you ought to do?
Well, I'm going to talk with him at greater length. What he really thinks is that you should provide a diplomatic structure within which the thing can go under the control of Hanoi and walk away from it. I don't think that's an unfair statement, but I will ask him to do.
You mean he thinks that Hanoi ought to take South Vietnam?
Yes, sir. Diplomatically.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe by calling it a neutralization and removing American force and letting it slip away the way Laos would if we didn't do anything, and will if we don't do anything. And we would guarantee the neutrality in some sort of a treaty that we would write. I'm sorry, not sure I'm the best person to describe Lippmann's views, because I don't agree with them. And
who's he been talking to besides you? Has he talked to Ruskin on this?
He's talked to
McNamara?
George Ball. He's talked to George Ball, and he's talked to. I don't think he's talked to Ruskin. I don't think he's talked to McNamara.
Wouldn't it be good for he and McNamara to sit down and?
I think it would be very good, but I don't. I think that I'll do. I had planned to have lunch with Walter on Monday because I couldn't find a workable time before that. But I can do it sooner if you'd like me to.
I wish you would.
I will.
I try to get him.
I'll get
his ideas a little more concrete before I leave here, and I'd like to have him talk to McNamara. I might just have the three of you in this afternoon sometime.
All right.
Walter, McNamara, and him. I'd like to hear Walter and McNamara evaluate this thing. Yeah.
All right. What's possible time?
Well, at 4 o'clock time, you got open.
The damned Irishman is all over the place.
Off-record meetings on Southeast Asia. They got you at 4 today.
That's at 4. That's to review the telegrams to Lodge and other action items that we've been working on the last 2 days. And
I've got Ireland at 5, so why don't we just see if they can't come at 4?
I put off the 4 o'clock meeting?
No, yeah, put
or do you want to put Lippmann at 6, or do you want to?
No, got to dinner tonight.
Yeah.
We better, we could, you and I could get together at 3:45, and Lippmann and Mac come in at 4 if they would.
Yes. What happens then to the working meeting is my only problem.
How long do you have to have it?
It wouldn't take you 10, 15 minutes.
Well, I'd say I'll come in 3:45 with you.
We'll try and do that business.
And then have them come in at 4.
All right. Well, I'll make it 3:45, and then have Lippmann standing by at 4:15, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Or 4 o'clock. From 4 o'clock on.
Yeah.
Aye, sir.
Thank you again for watching. I appreciate your channel support. Keep those comments coming.